recalling things. So that's the gate. You can see this can also be a ducker or another compressor or expander. But for now, I'm going to just talk about the gate and compressor function since that's the most common things. So I'm now in Dynamics 2 here, and you can see I'm set to a compressor by default. This one can be a compander, two different kinds of compander, or a de-esser. But we'll skip over those for now. Okay, you'll see that it starts with a threshold, which is very familiar to us coming from the gate, but a compressor works totally opposite of what a gate does. Where a gate manages the signal automatically when the signal gets too low, the compressor automatically manages the signal when the level gets too high, higher than the threshold. So what the compressor is doing is automatically reducing the level of the signal based on some settings that we're going to set. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. So you see the threshold says, at what volume do you want to start compressing? And then the next knob over is this one called the ratio. Here's the fast version. So it's expressed as a ratio. You'll see it's like right now it says 2.5:1. So 2.5 to 1 is the current ratio. The fast version is that the larger the number on the left, the harder it's going to compress. The lower the number on the left, the less it's going to compress. Okay? You'll watch this little line is actually going to change as I turn that. Okay? So more compressed, less compressed. So the more technical reason of what that means, and I did an audio training last night, and I tell people that I spent too long mixing only knowing the easy version of that before I learned what that actually meant. That when I finally figured out what the heck it actually meant, I feel like I have to explain it to everybody else so I can at least be proud of my accomplishment of figuring out what that meant. So the ratio, like I said, right now it's set at 2 to 1. What that means is for every 2 dB that the incoming signal is above the threshold, the output of the compressor will only be 1 dB louder than the threshold. So we're going to do some quick math. If my threshold is at -12 and my signal is at -10, how much louder is my input signal than my threshold? 2 dB, right? Okay, so if I'm set at a ratio of 2 to 1 and my threshold's 12, my signal's -10, how loud will the output be?
11.
There you go. So it's going to take off 1 dB. But then if my input signal is -8, now I'm 4 dB higher than my threshold, so my output's going to be 2 dB higher than my threshold, so my output's going to be -10. Okay? Makes sense? I know it's kind of technical, but again, the important piece is the lower the number on the left, the less you're going to compress the signal, the higher the number, the more you're going to compress it. So in practical application, I like to start at 2.5 on pretty much everything, which is nice. That's actually the default ratio on this console on every channel, which is really great. So I like to start there with everything and then tweak up or down depending on whichever I need. The thing I'm going to come back to on compression is by far the tool that is the easiest to overuse. And if you overuse it, it's going to sound awful. So be really, really gentle with compression. It's an awesome tool. I use it on nearly every single channel on every console that I mix on. But I use it sparingly. I like to use it on every channel a little, is the way I like to describe it. So if I'm just taking the very loudest of a signal and just reducing it down a little bit, you're not going to hear a whole lot of that. But the thing is, the more I compress the signal, you're going to hear that compression work. So let's actually do that.
So, quick question: when you starting at 2.5, when you adjust your compression, do you adjust the ratio or the threshold?
Both. It's a relationship between the two, because I'm basically saying if I want to go for more compression overall, lowering the threshold so that it's going to engage sooner is one step. But then there's but how much volume do I actually want to take off is like when I'm going to start engaging the ratio. So it's really a dance between the two to find that right place. So there's not. It's like I know that I like the sound of 2.5 to 1 on most things as a starting place. So I tend to start there, get the threshold to kind of where I feel like I'm starting to get a little bit of reduction, and then sometimes I'll be like, I want to compress this just a little harder, and I'll grab the ratio. So it's not something that there's here's the answer on it. It's something you just got to play with, and you'll find where you want to start and where you feel comfortable and what works for you. All right, so I'm going to turn this mic up a little bit, and I'm going to start cranking that threshold down. And what I'm looking for is right here on the right GR, that means gain reduction. That's showing me how much volume is being removed. So right here, you can see that when I get loud, it's pulling about 6 dB off the signal. My rule of thumb, and again, there's so many times to break rules of thumb, but my rule of thumb is that 60 dB of compression is about as much as I can take before I start really noticing it. Now there's times where I'm gonna intentionally compress something, and compress it hard. Like one of the things that's super popular in worship right now is really compressed piano. Like that's a popular sound. So a lot of times, depending on if that's the sound people are going for, I'm gonna compress the snot out of the piano, knowing that I'm gonna hear it, but because that's kind of like the hip sound for piano and worship in a lot of cases. But on a vocal, I'm rarely gonna break that rule because it's gonna sound horrible. So as I just lower this threshold, I want you to just hear how the life is being sucked out of this. I can just get loud and the PA doesn't get loud. So that's what I'm trying to that's that balance I'm trying to live within, is I don't want it to sound like this. This is over compressed. This doesn't allow me to have any dynamics. You right here can hear me getting loud, but the people in the room don't hear loud. They hear pumping volume being pulled out of this signal, which sounds bad. So I'm gonna lighten that threshold up, and you can hear somewhere in here I'm getting a good amount of compression. It's taking 60 dB oftentimes, but it doesn't sound horrible. It's not yanking life out of it. Now right now I haven't put any EQ on this mic yet, and there's things that'll help me to hear that less, because the low end is where I hear the most of that. Once I apply a little bit of EQ to this channel, you'll actually hear even less of that working. But right there, when you're really loud, it's doing too much. So it's about finding the dynamic range of the person who's singing or talking, and just taking that edge off. Now, one of the things I showed you earlier is that you can actually have, obviously Dynamics 2 defaults to a compressor. Dynamics 1 can also be a compressor. There are times when, rather than compressing something hard in one engine, I'll actually use 2 compressors. Some people just have a really big range, a really big dynamics range. I'm not just talking pitch range, I'm talking dynamics range. They can be loud, and they can be quiet. And some people just really will swing that range all the way around. And sometimes what I'll do is actually use 2 compressors in a row. And so I'll have one that's kind of dealing with if they're kind of in this normal range, I'm having one that's just taking those peaks off. And I'm gonna have another one that's set a few dB higher on the threshold for when they really get loud, that's gonna apply a little bit harder compression when they get really loud, rather than trying to just find a sweet spot with one. Sometimes on some vocals, stacking 2 is the trick that'll actually get you perfect to where I've got a really healthy sound for when they're kind of in their normal volume. And then when they go for that big thing that's really extra loud, I got a second compressor that's just gonna pinch that back a little